One. Okay,
Oh,
are we good to go?
yep.
Perfect. I'm so excited. Today I am with Austin Hill. Austin, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm also doing really well. I had a nice lunch. Now I'm looking forward to the rest of the day. And so, Austin, I usually start off with where did we first meet? I think I remember because you did a magic trick.
Oh,
I don't know if you
I
recall, but it was
I've been
actually.
known to do them once in a while. Yes.
Oh my God. It was still trying to figure it out. Still trying to figure it out, but keep working on it. I think it was many years ago at Consensus or something like that. And so yeah, so good to catch up. As you might be already aware, I don't know even why I'm doing this exactly, but I'm definitely having fun doing this, which is going around and asking everyone what their story is. So not about the all-time highs or this or that, but really what everyone that I know and have come across and I look up to in this journey, right, over the last 8, 9, 10 years, what their story is. And for some or many of my guests, Bitcoin tends to be, not all, but tends to be a singularity moment, if you will, to some extent, in the sense that it alters the way maybe we view the world or how we thought things were possible. Maybe it is for you, maybe it isn't. So that's why I call this Bitcoin stories. And then secondly is just the second big question is what's the problem I guess you're setting out to solve today, and how are you going about doing that? But love to start on the first one, even if it takes the whole session just talking about your story. I'm game because I think you have a very colorful one. Okay, so let's dive into it. Where does it begin? Where does it begin for you?
I guess first and foremost, I consider myself much more an entrepreneur. Certainly was a geek entrepreneur. I loved computers from a very young age. Got into computers. We got one of the very first VIC 20s, and I'd been begging my dad for a computer. He was an accountant, and they had an old IBM Mini computer in their accounting office, and they had one of these big 10-inch floppy disks that had a few computer games on it,
Mm.
Space Invaders and stuff. And he would bring me into the office on the weekends. He couldn't get me to leave because I just loved this idea of playing video games on one of their computers. And so when the home computer came out, I found I would go to the library on the weekends. I would photocopy Byte magazine and take programs and go home and type it out and build my own version of Snake or whatever the video game of the month was printed in the computer magazine. And of all the activities my parents tried to get me into as kind of a geeky, chubby kid, computer camp was the only one I actually enjoyed. Everything else was miserable. It was like, let me go back to computer camp. And so playing around with computers was really good. I got in at the beginning of the kind of BBS days. I ran a bulletin board out of my home. I convinced my parents to get me an extra phone line and was running bulletin board systems. This is in the early 80s. I was playing around with acoustic couplers, and that kind of led me into a little bit of hacking and phone phreaking. So I played around with exploring computer networks, and some I was authorized to be in, some I wasn't.
Yeah.
But when I was finally approaching the end of high school, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I had some trouble with the traditional education system, so I've been in and out of school. But once I actually applied myself, I actually had an opportunity to go to top engineering schools with full scholarship, because if I applied myself, I could do well. But most times I found the structure so boring that I found it very hard to apply myself. But at the end of kind of high school, by the time I got around to that, which included a few years away from school, I was just burnt out. And I went to the actual Calgary Board of Education because I grew up in Western Canada. And I pointed out to them that there were a bunch of holes in their computer network that allowed anyone to go in and change grades. And pointed out this is probably a bad thing for a school board going into the computer age to allow anyone with a phone number to dial in and edit grades. And their response was, thank you for pointing this out. We're either going to call the police or we'll take you up on your offer to hire you, which showed a little bit of chutzpah, but I, like friends of mine in the hacker world in the United States who had all run into the FBI. There was a big operation called Operation Sun Devil, which cracked down on the hackers, which led to the creation of EFF. A number of them had turned around and started offering their services as cybersecurity consultants, essentially red team attacks. So at that point, I was like, you know what? I know I want to work in the computer field. It's all I've ever wanted to do. I wanted to be a computer entrepreneur. I was actually, for a number of years, angry at my parents because they hadn't given birth to me 10 years earlier and in Silicon Valley, because I thought I'd missed my chance to be Steve Jobs or like Steve Wozniak, because they were my heroes growing up.
Hmm.
And I actually got the job. So I started doing computer security consulting. I, was training people. I did power utility companies. I did oil companies. I did a number of large public institutions like the Calgary Board of Education, where I'd go in and find all the flaws in their system, go retrain the employees, do some creative kind of penetration attacks with the company's authorization. And all of a sudden I was earning more than any teacher I had. And I was like, okay, why do I need to go to university? A little bit of hubris and I think arrogance, but I found my way. And then I quickly soured on consulting. I realized that consulting isn't a scalable business.
Mm.
And thankfully, I think my father and my family structure had an encouragement of entrepreneurship. My dad, even though he was an accountant, was very often investing in clients' businesses. He had side businesses. And I come from a very large family, and over dinner table discussions were, if this stock works out, we'll go to Disneyland. If not, we're camping. Either way, it was a great summer vacation. But you can rest assured, I was like looking at the stock every day and researching how stocks work. And so this idea of risk reward was something I just grew up around. And so in early 94, I moved to Montreal. I had been living on my own, but I visited my family because my father had moved out there as part of one of his careers. He was the CFO of a large public company and had taken them public. And as part of that, he moved out to Montreal to integrate an acquisition they did. And I moved and couldn't get an internet account. Quebec was behind every other place in North America for internet providers. And it was just this weird thing because the Quebec government had announced that they were going to launch a free net and provide free internet access funded by the government, but they were going to translate the entire internet into French. And so they were going to build a portal that would well, at the time, there were only a few thousand websites. This is literally 6 months after Mosaic had launched. And Gopher, and if you look back, Archie, and a lot of the previous internet protocols were all invented in Quebec. They were invented at CRIM, the Center for Research of Information Technology. And so Quebec had this kind of mentality that, hey, we want to lead the world in internet access. And France had a model like this with Minitel. And so they announced $50 million in funding to build a Quebec internet portal, which would be free to all the citizens. And I had just moved from Alberta, and I was looking at this and said, this will never work. But no one else opened up a commercial ISP because they thought the government was going to offer it for free. And so like overnight, I went to my dad and I went to a couple investors and I said, guys, I'm opening an internet provider. And they were like, this is ridiculous. The government's going to open for free. And I'm like, this project will never launch. Would you trust the government to launch an internet provider? This is ridiculous. And so I raised some money. I went out and bought a bunch of modems, and I started an internet provider and thankfully grew that to be one of the largest in Canada. I was still in my early 20s. Coincidentally, Montreal went from last place in terms of internet providers per capita to the most oversaturated market, because I wasn't the only one who had that idea. And so it went from 2 internet providers for the entire city, both of which were nonprofits, to 140 internet providers for the same city. And not a single one of them had more than 1,000 subscribers.
Okay.
And so there was just no density because everyone launched at the same time. We outmarketed others. We did some hustle. We cut some deals with retailers like Future Shop and created like internet starter kits that went with every computer sold in Canada. And we eventually grew to be the second largest retail ISP in Canada. And that was a company called Totalnet. My brother was actually my partner because at one point my business was exploding and I was good with the tech and not the business. So I convinced him to drop out of university and come help me run it. And that was our business until 96. And 1996, we sold that. We saw broadband coming. We knew that we couldn't compete with the telcos and the cable companies and the infrastructure advantage they had. And we built the company up to 12 or 13 million in revenue. We were cash flow positive, which was a very worthy accomplishment. And we decided to sell it. Thankfully, it was a sideways deal, but the investors made a lot of money, and I made more money than I could ever imagine I was going to make because we sold it for stock. And that company became BC Emergis, which Bell Canada ended up turning it into one of their internet arms, and it became skyrocket in the first .com boom. And we all had escrow stock, so it was great. So, this is now 96, 97. And I was thinking, what do I want to do next? And I was always a very big fan of digital civil liberties. I've been tracking everything that had been happening with the cypherpunks. I knew some of those guys. I saw what was happening with Phil Zimmerman and PGP and the whole computer battle over encryption. At the time, you could export encryption from Canada, whereas the United States, it was illegal. And so the same way I saw the browser and Netscape and NCSA Mosaic added a UI to the web and made browsing the web a mass market, very accessible activity, which had given birth to the internet. There really wasn't a good answer for how to do that with encryption tools. Privacy, payments, everyone was afraid of putting credit cards online at the time because it was just the start of SSL, and no one wanted to shop online. And in every survey, people said the number one concern I have about going online is privacy. What's going to happen with my data? And I really thought there was an opportunity to take cypherpunk grade privacy technologies, which were just theoretical at that time. Some existed, like anonymous remailers, pseudonym servers. There was a concept called PipeNet, which was actually created by Wei Dai, who was named, comes back in Bitcoin with his BitGold and paper. So he had come up with the idea of PipeNet, which was also built off David Schoen's DC Nets, which was a way to build anonymous IP. Some of the same stuff that is now in Tor. And so I put together a plan. We used some of our own seed capital, my brother, and we actually recruited our father. We hired him out of his CFO job.
Okay.
And the three of us decided to raise money for a company called Zero Knowledge Systems. And we went out and hired some of the top cypherpunks in the world, including Dr. Ian Goldberg, who was a famous cryptographer in cypherpunk. He's now professor at Waterloo doing privacy and security technologies. We recruited Adam Back, and he was famous for Hashcash at the time, and we were doing anonymous identities and remailers. And so the whole idea of using Hashcash as an anonymous remailer postage mechanism. We tried to buy the DigiCash patents because they were going through bankruptcy at the time, and we actually lost that bid. So we hired and got all the patent suite of Dr. Stefan Brands, which was the only other way of doing electronic cash fully anonymously at the time that was known. And he was David Chome's PhD student. And so he had a competing suite of technologies that allowed you to do an anonymous mint, anonymous electronic cash, and anonymous identity credentials. And so we went full in. We said, we're going to build a graphical, easy UI that the minute you click a button gives you an anonymous IP with layered tunneled encryption, gives you a pseudonym online, gives you an email address, has a desktop firewall to manage your cookies. And eventually we'll roll out electronic cash so you can be online, you can be fully anonymous, you can pay for things, and you can exist online without ever giving up your ID.
Whoa, okay.
At the time, got a lot of attention. We were on 60 Minutes, we were on the cover of magazines, we were called the company the NSA most wants to shut down. We raised 75 million in the lead up to the .com crash. A lot of venture capital. So I learned how to navigate the waters of venture capital, how to pitch the idea. At our peak, we had 280 employees, which included probably around 30 pure and applied cryptographers, all cypherpunks. Some of the legends of the cypherpunk era, some of the people who had done some of the most interesting work. And so that was kind of my community. These were my employees, and we loved the mission. Painfully, we realized that the market for privacy, especially at that time, was not real. What people say on surveys is very different than what they do in action. So the same way at the time, you might have had a bunch of people say, I care about the environment, but you ask them, are you going to buy an electric car or an SUV? Oh, I need my SUV. I care about the environment, but I'm not going to change what I do. And we had overgrown. We made a lot of mistakes. It's typical of the dot-com era. When the dot-com crash happened, we were running a very heavy burn rate. We had been growing ahead of the growth of the revenue. We had expanded horizontally and started building like all these different divisions, doing electronic cash, doing mobile payments. We had pilots going with, we were actually one of the first people to offer a product and service paid for with eCash, fully anonymous eCash, because we had used the Stefan Brand's technologies to allow people to buy our pseudonyms so that we could never associate a pseudonym with the owner. And so we created our own mint, offered these anonymous tokens that you would pay for the tokens, and then you would claim your pseudonym, because we charge $10 a year per pseudonym, which gave you full access to the anonymous overlay network. We pioneered a lot of research on how do you do traffic analysis on like Tor, what are the risks of being anonymous IP? Because we really believed in security through transparency, not security through obscurity. So every system we released, we actually released a threat paper and a formalized threat model that says, what are the ways you can attack the claims that we're making? Similar to, I think, the ethos of Bitcoin. And yeah, we believed in this stuff. And so that was the kind of the three legs of zero knowledge: was anonymous IP, be online and never get tracked; anonymous identities. You could have a pseudonym and an email that no one can associate, not even us. And we had cases where the FBI knocked on our door and said, tell us who this is. And we said, we just can't. The system's designed in such a way that we cannot tell you. And that was threatening to some people. And then the last one, which we tried, which we spent over $7 or $8 million trying to roll out, was electronic cash. But bootstrapping electronic cash was a very difficult premise at the time, because the idea and all of the attempts was bearer certificate, eCash, but we were all trying to recreate fiat-based currencies by an issuing entity that you had to have trust under. So it was either a bank or because there were tons of these .coms that launched token systems like Cybercash, Flues. Whoopi Goldberg was famously the promoter of Flues, and it was like a token system where you put money on deposit with them and then you can go spend your tokens. And what was unique about the stuff that David Shom and Dr. Stefan Brands had created was that you could actually build an anonymous mint such that you could never be traced in your spending. Both the merchant you spend the money on and the banker who receives the token can prevent double spending, but never associate it with you. So you can guarantee that there's no double spends, and you can guarantee complete anonymity of the system. And it was using blind signatures from a crypto point of view. Once the dot-com crash happened, it was a very painful, tough time. A lot of businesses, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of startup employees all went through it, but we had to radically overhaul the business. We had to fire a lot of the scientists and researchers, the work I really loved, just because the market wasn't there. And we just had never gotten to scale, even though we had so much interest and so much publicity. And we actually built the product that did what we said it did. In many respects, we were ahead of our time. A large part of the internet was still on dial-up internet at the time. And the amount of overhead that encrypting all of your packets 3 times to go through 3 relays occurs on a 56K modem connection. All of a sudden, like 30% of your packet overhead is encryption wrapping. And it becomes very slow. Whereas a couple of years later, when broadband penetration had actually happened, Tor can be usable, even though it's still very slow. There were a lot of mistakes, but we did pull the company out. But as part of that process, we had to pivot towards stuff that was just profitable, very profitable, but not really the mission-orientated, re-architect the internet for privacy, cypherpunk dream that we had originally. Eventually, we actually built kind of a security suite that protected against spyware, antiviruses, gave you a desktop firewall, and we white labeled it to internet providers. When you signed up with Simpatico in Canada or Verizon in the States or Bell South, they would come in and say, essentially, for $4 or $5 a month, we can give you a complete internet security suite. And that was all our technology that powered it. So it was still in the security field. It became very profitable. We were able to recap. We got rid of some VCs that we didn't like on our cap table. We had to go through some painful reorganization because we had raised money at such a high valuation and then went through the dot-com crash. But eventually we were able to have some liquidation. We were able to sell part of it to a private equity partner. And I at that time moved on and wanted to get back to startups. And so my brother and father continued to run that company, and I went and started working on startups. This is 2007, maybe, the dawn of the Web 2.0 social revolution. And I did some angel investing. I was really focused on trying to build community. I don't know if you remember this time, but in Toronto, this was when bar camps and David Crow and a lot of the community had just begun there. And so I set up the first demo camp in Montreal. I set up the first bar camp. I set up the startup camp series in Montreal. I was going across Canada and helping promote that. We did one in Calgary. I was trying to get the ecosystem I had seen in Silicon Valley that didn't exist at the time in Canada. There was an adage that if you want to see the best Canadian companies, you go to a top US tech conference. No one actually met in the cities they lived in. Everyone just lived in their own bubble and did their own thing. And you just hardly knew that there were great tech companies living next door to you. And that's not really good for angel investing. It's not good for creating densities of intensity where you have shared learning and expertise and community. And I had put a bunch of effort in there. I started a social gaming startup called Akoa, which didn't work out, but was inspired by some ideas I had in post-scarcity economics and gift culture, a Burning Man type experiment where you could create a pay-it-forward karmic trail of doing random acts of kindness. Yeah, and
sorry, I really don't want to interrupt you.
Please interrupt.
There's one thing I want to ask you, because you've touched on this a few times, right? Which is this theme that Canada continues to struggle with, which is near and dear to my heart as well for the longest time. And by the way, I'm from Edmonton. I was born and raised in Alberta as well. And a lot of people don't know University of Alberta has, if you were to rank the number of papers that come out on artificial intelligence and machine learning, University of Alberta, I think, is number 2 in the world. Yet
they have one of the best poker AI bots.
Insane. And then you look at, you mentioned Waterloo and university. There's just so many great universities out east. Yet traditionally it's always been go to the valley. And even growing up, I always wanted to someday live there. Now things have obviously changed there a bit, but I do wonder, what is that? Why is that the case? Is it because we haven't closed the loop in terms of we haven't had big exits with entrepreneurs with mega exits that haven't been able to feed that startup loop, if you will, or I don't know, maybe it's a bigger question, but it's something I think about a lot.
It's a broad conversation. I'm happy to go into a few top level thoughts. Any community or ecosystem takes a while to build, and it's all unique. Yes, some of the precursors are having a couple big wins. You look at what happened in Israel after ICQ sold early in the .com evolution, and it created this kind of fall on, and there became a really strong Israeli tech scene, partially supported by how many people go into the military and receive advanced technical training and then come out. And the Israeli community had a very risk-taking entrepreneurial culture, and it was, focused. Canada was spread out. It's a very large country. So even in each individual city, there wasn't like a concentration like you saw in the Bay Area or in Cambridge or in Seattle, which were the 3 big kind of tech ecosystems before New York kind of built its version of Silicon Alley. Our capital structure in Canada was horribly broken. People don't know, but Canada invented the original ICO scam structure, which was like blind capital pools. It was SPACs before there were SPACs. And it was on the Alberta Stock Exchange and the Vancouver Stock Exchange, which were all these reverse takeover of penny stock companies. And that was what angel investment was known as. It was doctors, it was dentists that would all buy into this blind capital pool, and a promoter would go out and find an idea and pump and dump it. And that was the early stage capital ecosystem in Canada, which was you went public really too early, and then you got surrounded by scamsters and pump and dumpers and promoters. And it created a misallocation of capital, and most capital being used to market your stock and run up your price to get to the next funding event or to cash out, as opposed to building products with aligned risk capital, which is intelligent capital that can help you risk mitigate and grow your business based off experience. That's what Silicon Valley had. When you had repeat entrepreneurs recycling capital and applying expertise with capital, they can tell you that guy sucks as a product manager, never hire him. He's going to screw up your product launch. Or you need to be looking for this type of person. And that expertise is invaluable. When the only advice you get is some stock promoter who says, I can give you 300K, and then we can spend half of it on promotion and architecture and getting you on the news, and then we can do your next round and raise you $1.5 million, and they're taking 8% off the top in fundraising fees. And that was the early stage capital structure in Canada. We had a couple of great examples of a few tech companies, but for me, they were out east. And those people were so busy building their companies like Corel, Newbridge, Terry Matthews. They were diehard entrepreneurs who were continually building their empires. And they weren't that active doing side angel deals. Later in life, they became very active. But we just didn't have that same ecosystem that we saw emerge in the Silicon Valley.
Makes sense. And like you said, I think we could do a whole episode on this one. But back to your story. It's so fascinating, Austin. Continue.
Sure. So
we're 07 now or 08? Is that kind of where we're at?
Yeah, kind of 07 to 09. So I made a lot of mistakes getting into angel investing, I think. And some of these are just known rules that I ignored. But I wrote a bunch of angel checks. I just had this passion for entrepreneurship. So I would meet great entrepreneurs and I would write them checks, oftentimes not having done the right due diligence or not looking at the right deal structure. I oftentimes saw what I would do if I were running the company. And that's an important distinction between being an entrepreneur and an angel investor is it's not your company to run. And so this projection that you have where you're like, oh, I see so much greatness in this company. Let me write a check because I could see them doing all this stuff. You're actually saying, well, if you were running the company, if you and the entrepreneur don't agree, then your capital is probably not going to get the best use if that's what you think you're investing in versus what they are. I enjoy doing it. Listen, we helped create, a couple of buddies and I created one of the early stage Canadian VCs that became known as Real Ventures. I wrote the thesis for Y Combinator, their version of the Y Combinator program in Canada called Founder Fuel. I designed and trained hundreds of entrepreneurs on how to raise capital because it was something I was good at, raising money. So I was known as the pitch master who would go in and help people rework their fundraising decks, help them on how to explain stories. So I was doing all that while I was trying to be an entrepreneur. And that wasn't actually a service to my investors or my partners in my entrepreneurship. Because you've been an entrepreneur, it takes a singular focus to get an idea off the ground. And some people have that ability. They either have enough resources or wealth, or they know how to multitask and can context switch, but it's quite rare. I've rarely seen entrepreneurs be able to have multiple entrepreneurial actions. Being an angel investor requires a lot of time and focus if you're going to do it well. Being a VC requires time and focus. Being a community builder takes time and focus, and being an entrepreneur takes time and focus. And I was trying to do it all at the same time. And so come 2009, 2010, kind of in parallel with what was occurring with Bitcoin, I actually took a break. I'll even say it, probably burnt out. I've been doing nothing but startups back to back for years. We had lost our youngest sibling. We're a big family to a battle with cancer that was very painful. And I had taken some time off to study cancer and help him in his battle. Even though that was unsuccessful, it was just something that left some scarring in terms of just causing me to rethink what I wanted to do in life, what was most important. And the idea of just being in my inbox 10 hours a day just no longer held any appeal for me. In fact, I had stopped being excited about tech, even though lifelong I believed in singularity. I believe in tech. I was the Uber geek who loved this stuff. And so I took some time off and I traveled a bit. I played poker just because it was fun and intellectually stimulating. I spent way too many nights in a poker room trying to get good. I took a few years off, and it was funny. It was during that time that I had a bunch of ex-employees and friends who all started pinging me about Bitcoin. And they're, Austin, you got to check this out. Have you seen the paper? And my literal kind of knee-jerk reaction was, I'm glad someone figured it out, but I have no desire to revisit that pain and those battle scars. I was like, I just spent $7 million trying to do this for a decade. I don't bear them any ill will. I'm glad hopefully it works. Hopefully it'll exist. But I was just like, it was just where my mindset was at the time. And yeah, I was trying to stay out of my inbox as much as possible. So the idea of jumping back into it, and yeah, obviously I regret that a bit. I think given my history with the project and given all the scientists I knew and all the cypherpunk history I was part of and immersed myself in, I'm sure I would have seen all the opportunities that I didn't end up seeing it until a couple of years later when I did jump in. But it was the right thing for me at the time, including I went back and fought another battle with cancer with someone I loved, my life partner and wife, girlfriend at the time. She contracted cancer. And so I once again fought that battle successfully this time. And that was actually what brought me, in fact, to Bitcoin. I had seen the failings of how we as a society deal with chronic and potentially terminal disease, both socialized medicine and the US system. I had assembled a kind of private set of tech tools, doctors, my own research team, and including some bleeding edge stuff that just doesn't translate well into a lot of cancer. We're beginning to see it now. There's more acceptance of things like immunotherapy, integrated treatment protocols that actually combine a range of things beyond just chemo or beyond just one medication. But traditionally, that's been very hard to get funding or to get any type of approval for, because the medical system works on FDA double-blind clinical trials where you have to prove the efficacy of a single or two elements or a very reduced set of things. And that's very hard to do if you're including things like anti-cancer natural products, curcumin, turmeric. There's no money in proving that turmeric has a whole bunch of anti-cancer properties. You can't patent it. No one's going to do the clinical trial. And so our approach was, she had stage 4 cancer and was told that it was very likely she would pass. And I just didn't want to accept that answer, having been through that. In that battle, and once she eventually was shown to be in full remission and we were able to cross our fingers, celebrate, and she's doing very well, by the way, years later, still in remission. I formed some really strong opinions about how socialized medicine and private insurance-based medicine is going to collapse upon the weight of some of these chronic diseases. Eventually, the singularity in technologies could and will get so far advanced that we can actually focus on treating the disease as opposed to treating the sick people. But these systems are just not really well set up. And so I had come up with some ideas on how to build a brand new model using kind of advanced technologies, AI, some very advanced biological and drug discovery in a totally different way. And I ran some numbers and I figured I needed $500 million to bootstrap this, or $500 million to $1 billion. And I knew I could raise part of that money because I'm good at raising capital, but I wanted to be able to throw in a couple $100 million of my own as a sign of strength and to retain equity in the idea. And so I was playing around with that idea in kind of 2013 when Adam came knocking on my door and said, I know I've been bugging you, but you've got to pay attention to Bitcoin. And Adam had worked for me. We were friends and associates at Zero Knowledge Systems. He had just left his previous startup and was spending a lot of time on Bitcoin and with the Bitcoin core. And I was like, sure. I was like, I'm getting back into looking at some tech ideas, looking at various projects. Let's meet. And he met up with me in Montreal. And we did I went through the Bitcoin rabbit hole very quickly. I didn't sleep for 10 days, read everything that was ever written. I pretty much at that time I could. And obviously had some background knowledge because I had looked at every eCash proposal. I had worked on stuff. I had spent time with David Shom and Adam and Dr. Stefan Brands. I grew up around this stuff and I had spent a bunch of money trying to build versions of it. So I saw very quickly, a lot of the things that we had missed, the decentralized nature, some of the gold aspects and the monetary policy freedom of not basing it on fiat-based federal government money and actually saying that it was crazy, but it was discussed in the old cypherpunk list. There are some posts that people have not looked at where Adam proposed it, and a few people said, hey, instead of waiting for a bank to let us print digital dollars, why don't we just create something new? Like, as long as it has some sort of properties like fixed supply. And that's what Nick Szabo wrote about. And we were old friends with Nick Szabo. And so the idea that it finally bootstrapped and actually was starting to scale, this is 2013 when ASICs were just coming online. I was like, okay, I'm in, Adam. How do we do this? And that kind of led to what became Blockstream. I flew to Malta. I spent a week with him where we went through all the different problems, the ecosystem, how we saw different ecosystem players. There's going to be exchanges, there's going to be this, there's going to be, wallets. We really just mapped out the way I did as a venture capitalist or an entrepreneur. How does this ecosystem evolve and where are the pain points? And one of the biggest ones we saw was no one was investing in the core developers. No one was investing in the hard, low-level infrastructures. We absolutely believed that Bitcoin needed to remain free and open and shouldn't ever be controlled by a company. We designed every single contract at Blockstream around that, some of which came back to bite me. But for all the accusations and the FUD that gets thrown at Blockstream as being the Illuminati of the Bitcoin world or Bilderberg or some absolutely ridiculous, because we actually designed the company from day one to prevent the company from being able to abuse any power and to actually create escape valves such that if the company ever did gain too much power, the company could self-implode, which was like a poison pill designed by founders, which, but yeah, we wrote the plan. And very quickly I told Adam, I'm like, okay, let's do this. So we started meeting with a lot of the core developers, people that Adam thought might be like-minded. And a lot of the people don't realize that most of these people were working at Google, they were working at Mozilla, they had day jobs. A couple of them had quit their jobs and had spent all their savings and all their Bitcoin savings, because Bitcoin was still like $200, $300, $400 a Bitcoin. And these people were paying for their family and their rent and their own lifestyle out of their own pocket just to keep working on Bitcoin, because that's all they wanted to do. And I was like, this is ridiculous. You don't have Red Hat programmers going bankrupt. It's the most popular open source operating system in the world. And companies are more than willing to pay for someone to work on kernel updates or video drivers or whatever for Red Hat, for Linux and that open source ecosystem. But no one at the time was really investing in the open source devs. The only one was really Jeff Garzik, who at the time was working for BitPay. And the Bitcoin Foundation tried to fund some of it, which caused a lot of controversy. And there was a lot of backlash because Gavin got mixed up in that and people didn't agree with the foundation representing it on politics and trying to grow the industry. And it had a lot of false starts, given that half of the board got arrested for one reason or another. Like, not the best start for an industry association. Yeah, so we went out, raised money, was very successful at that. Obviously, we had some history. We raised $21 million. The majority of that money came from absolute ethical, long-term believers in open internet, open standards, open protocols, who we chose specifically because and Reid Hoffman was one of those. And he's written about his reasons for investing, the same reasons he sits on the board of Mozilla. He says the future of the web can't just be written by Microsoft or Google. If companies just run the web, that's bad for the web. And so he believed Mozilla as an open source ecosystem needed to exist. And similarly, he saw that in Bitcoin. And so that gave us a lot of freedom to just say, let's hire the best people, not hire, but bring them on as co-founders. That was a key aspect of this, was that these were actually our partners in creating the company. And that was the start of Blockstream. And sidechains was the original idea, the idea that we could help build extensibility and grow functionality in sidechains that weren't, because we knew the base layer was very hard to upgrade and should be. It shouldn't be something that's able to change on a moment's notice or by a small edict of one or two people. But very quickly, we found ourselves, we had a lot of capital and there were a lot of things that no one was working on. So when the Lightning paper came out, it was never our stuff. the team decided, hey, that should also get funding. So we were able to hire Rusty Russell and get him working on Lightning. We were able to put some money into things like transaction malleability, SegWit, that fixed a major problem in the ecosystem. But the focus wasn't really to start off with make the most profitable company. It was really focus on the infrastructure, and some business opportunities will emerge. And yeah, it was a wild ride. I certainly appreciate the time I was able to spend around some of the smartest technical people in Bitcoin. And I would say some of the most, I hate the word most ethical because it's always subjective. I think if you've ever spent time with some of these devs, they get tons of flack. They carry the weight of an entire ecosystem on their shoulders in many respects, responsibility that they want to diversify. They didn't want to be the central power players. In a world surrounded and populated with scammers, pump and dumpers, and this was even pre-ICO, but we had begun to see every shitty idea every idea they would talk about. And they started actually talking about a bunch of ideas so that they could get them in the public domain so that they could prevent other people later from patenting them. And a key part of what we actually raised money for was the Defensive Patent League that we actually did, the Defensive Patent License, because we saw attacks on Bitcoin like patent trolls as an existential threat to the ecosystem. And we were like, if we don't build up an open source pool of patents, and thankfully now Square, Crypto, and other companies are now part of this, we see the threat that scammers like Craig Wright and Shane present now that they've decided and announced to the world they're going to be patent trolls. So we were allowed to do a lot of things because our metrics were not 100% grow revenue and become the most profitable Bitcoin company. The mission of the company was do whatever is good for the Bitcoin ecosystem and spend some time figuring out what are good businesses that align with that. So there were a bunch of businesses we looked at that I still think would have been hugely profitable, but we just looked at it and we were like, if we do this, it's just not good for all the other things we're working on. People are going to be very suspicious of us if we're running a service like this and we're trying to do work over here. So I ended up spending 2.5 years as the CEO of Blockstream. I raised another 55 million after the 21 million seed round. We raised that quite quickly, not because we needed the money, but just to top up the coffers because the market was frothy. And we knew that we could spend 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years without necessarily having a cash cow product. And through the scaling wars, which we can come back to if you want. I have some unique thoughts on some of the players there. And to be honest, it was a combination. So I found myself living out of a suitcase, traveling the world, which I thought was behind me as an entrepreneur. We had offices in a lot of different places. I was spending a lot more time in Silicon Valley and San Francisco than I wanted to. Most of my family, most of my friends, most of my support group just personally was in Montreal, which I really actually preferred. There are things I love about the Valley, but the Valley is just, especially at that time, everything's all crypto, every dinner is what startup are you working on? It's just impossible to turn off and have a life outside of tech industry. And I just didn't enjoy that. I had just come back from spending almost 1.5 years where I would try and meter my inbox usage to once a month. like literally, I was just coming back from that. And now I'm like in the heart of the Valley running a startup. And to be honest, is that in combination with a number of other things, the maelstrom that Blockstream, the company, got thrown into in the scaling wars, some of the personal attacks on the developers, there were death threats. We had employees end up in the emergency rooms with panic attacks. I took that very personally. I was protective for them and over them. And to be honest, I didn't deal with the stress all that great. And I started to find it was affecting my health. For a 14-month period, I had spent maybe 3.5 weeks in my home in Montreal. The rest was either living in a hotel room and living out of a suitcase. The job of a CEO is very intense and requires a certain level of, focus, dedication, personal health. And I think if I'm being honest with myself and look back, I don't know. I probably should have been clear with my investors and my partners earlier that, hey, I can help raise money. I can help doing some of the biz dev stuff, but let's orchestrate things that I'm not carrying the full load of the CEO role, because I don't know how long I really want to do that job.
Mm.
And I think I was just so in love with the idea of getting back and doing Bitcoin and doing something I loved, working with such smart people, because I always surrounded myself with top scientists, and it's exhilarating. Mid 2016, when I left, that was difficult, but it was the right decision. Adam thankfully took over. And to his credit, I don't think Adam ever had in mind that he wanted to be CEO. There just was no one else who could step into the role. And it's a thankless role. You've been CEO of a company when you have investor obligations, employee obligations, especially in an area like Bitcoin, which can be rather unforgiving if people don't like what you wear or like what you say or like how you part your hair on a given day. You certainly are going to hear about it. And to his credit, he stepped up and has continued to run the company. I'm still a shareholder there. Adam and I talk when we need to. And I'm a big fan of what we tried to do. And I think it plays a role in the industry. I'm also really glad that it's not playing the role that it originally had to, in the sense that we have seen a number of other companies all opt in and say, hey, we're going to invest in infrastructure as well. We've seen a great kind of industry step up to the fact that, hey, we all depend on this open source code base, and we all need to be part of its consensus, its creation, its community. We need to fund developers, we need to fund projects, we need to fund research. And that is healthy for an ecosystem. And given the fact that was Blockstream's original mission, was focus on the ecosystem of the infrastructure more than become the most profitable company in Bitcoin. There are tons more companies who make way more money than Blockstream and always will. We've seen exchanges are incredibly profitable business. Now you have to do it, you have to have market depth by adding shitcoins. That was something we just, day one, we were like, we will never do that. That's just not our business. If you're in the business of offering a digital currency exchange, you have to, because if you can't offer trading pairs, if one exchange that says we're the Bitcoin only exchange is not a good exchange, actually, if you're a trader. Not many traders are going to go and sign up. But we also see companies like River. We've seen companies like Swan, who are Bitcoin only shops and providing incredible services on ramp and off ramps. And so the idea that the ecosystem has grown and we see more people contributing to infrastructure, I think is great. I'm still excited by the work Blockstream's doing, but I'm also more excited just about what we're seeing with Bitcoin overall.
Whoa, that was insane, Austin. Thank you so much. Well, I mean, for that, but also for everything you do and you've done. Everything you said, I guess knew peripherally perhaps, but it was nice hearing it from you. I'm sure a lot of people will appreciate it, but I've always, okay, maybe I'll start with this, is that I did really well in engineering school, not because I was smart, but because I always knew how to find the smartest guy in the room. I was always best friends with the top guy. And so I'd always end up in the top 10% of the class, but it was just through osmosis. So when I got into Bitcoin, I quickly picked up who the smartest people in the room were, and Dr. Back and yourself. And I saw what you guys were building at Blockstream. And to me, it resonated. It looked like these were the people that were actually really serious about Bitcoin and seeing it live. And I saw how many of the core developers you guys were supporting. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about the scaling wars if you want. That was good. that was a tough time, and that was a tough time in Bitcoin, but I think it helped. Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and Bitcoin lasted through that, and today is probably stronger because of it. But one of the reasons I'm doing this Bitcoin stories thing is to recognize that, look, it's not just Bitcoin's not just these like ones and zeros. Bitcoin is a function of the people that have been doing work, not even from whatever 2009. It's like the stuff that you guys have been doing from far before then, right? And laying the groundwork for the internet itself, to to really recognizing the asymmetry in the world and the injustice, and then seeing how encryption was going to solve this, and the cypherpunk movement and everything. And so to hear it from you, who I have so much respect for, has been exhilarating. So where do we go here? So we talked about your story. Are you in semi-retirement mode? What are you up to nowadays? Are you doing the VC thing? What are you up to?
I've done a few angel investments. I've done some in health. I've done some in life extension. So some cool stuff working on some new drug discovery, energy levels in kind of mitochondria, doing another one that's a microbiome AI company with some friends. These are just pet projects where I care for the entrepreneur. There's one or two I'm looking at in Bitcoin, but more I'm just coaching a few entrepreneurs. There's still some parts of the ecosystem that I think need to emerge and that could help grow the overall space, especially in areas like risk and insurance. That's a fascinating area, is what insurance companies can do with Bitcoin and what insurance companies can offer to the Bitcoin ecosystem. And so there's some interesting entrepreneurs who have done some path work and done some good work in there that I'm coaching. But for the most part, I may or may not be doing some writing or start doing some writing or have started writing. But if and when it does happen, or should it be occurring, it's all pseudonymous. I kind of think there's some wisdom to that. I saw, unfortunately, Bitcoin, a lot of ideas get dismissed because of the personality or because of the person. And that's not fair. It's really shallow, but that's part of how social media and internet stuff gets taken. I responded to someone, AXA, the insurance company, who we raised a small amount of money from, a minority amount. And because the AXA chairman, who I have never met, we dealt with the venture capital division that was looking at blockchains and looking at Bitcoin and looking at potential use cases. We raised a small amount of money, but because their name came first when we listed our investors in our A round, because it was alphabetical, everyone assumes that AXA owns Blockstream. And this person attended the Bilderberg conference and was actually the chair of Bilderberg. So Bilderberg took over Blockstream. And I saw someone repeating that on Twitter, and mostly I just don't care. I stay out of it the other day. But and AXA announced it's accepting payments in Bitcoin. Great. Yet another big company warming up to Bitcoin. And they were like, of course, because AXA's Bilderberg. And I'm like, how does this even square? Like, how does this logically square? And they're like, AXA took control of Blockstream years ago. And I'm like, actually not. That's not true. They were a minority investor with no board seat. We raised $55 million in that round, which was our second round. And if you understand how venture economics work, you're usually your seed round, you give up 15 to the 25% of the company. And then your next round, hopefully you grow the valuation such that you're selling another 10 to 25% of the company max. But if you've sold off by your B round, 50% of the company already, you failed as an entrepreneur. And trust me, I'm not that shitty at raising venture capital that I would have sold that bit much of the company. So you can just do the math and realize that there's just no way that a company who invested in our round as a minority stake in a round would own or have any influence. And I tried pointing this out to the person, and they were like, what do you know? Who the fuck are you? Right? And I was like, well, I was the guy who negotiated the venture deal and signed the contract. So I think I'm qualified to comment on this. And the person goes, oh, I just looked you up. You're Mr. Hill. You're involved in Blockstream. So you must be a liar because you're protecting the Bilderbergs. And I was just like, okay, like it's no sweat off my back now. But it just shows the level of lies, misinformation, and it wears on you. And so I do have still some thoughts about the future of Bitcoin, some existential risks, I think, that get ignored. As much as I am a true believer in Bitcoin, I was raised in this kind of threat modeling idea where you always publish. And it's one of the things I loved working with the core developers that I was surrounded with, is not a single one of them ever promised Bitcoin to be more than it is. And they were so adamant of down talking its potential and pointing out how it was still in development. There are still so many things we don't know. There are still risks. I mentioned this recently. I saw a discussion between Adam Back and one of the core developers I hope he doesn't mind. It was Greg Maxwell, and one of the professors at Stanford who has invented more crypto than most Bitcoiners have ever used. A legend in the field of cryptography, Professor Dan Bonet. And I had the opportunity to sit there and watch them whiteboard and talk about new algorithms, potential extensions. Would you use this for this? And I just saw, I almost felt like I was watching a meeting between Feynman and Oppenheimer at the Manhattan Project, talking about the risks of unleashing the Manhattan atomic energy on the world, and was the world responsible? Because literally they were like, okay, this algorithm has been out there for 11 years. Do we feel it's strong enough or tested enough to deploy in a live system? And they're like, yeah, no, it needs another 10 years to bake, right? This kind of mentality of you would never put people's funds at risk by deploying something new and advanced is something that, frankly, it takes learned cryptographers a lot of experience to know that there are a lot of algorithms that have come out that get 5 years later, 6 years later, 7 years later, the flaw is finally discovered, or the backdoor in the case of some NIST and NSA approved algorithms. And so this idea of what is our responsibility as programmers or maintainers of a system to think through all the consequences and to take this risk mitigation and risk reduction. Security engineering, you only see it in, frankly, civic engineering, where they teach ethics in civic engineering. You go talk to people who put up a bridge or put up a new building, and they're not like, oh yeah, 2 months ago, University of Utah invented this new concrete that you can mix solvents and it forms self-forming concrete. And it's so great. And they're like, cool, can I get some to study? Oh, don't bother studying it. We're building a casino using it. That would be ridiculous, right? It's not safe. It's not it's not smart. And so I saw that approach to Bitcoin, and frankly, it taught me a lot. And the block size wars were a great example of that, where I've used this analogy before, and I don't want to make this just about any personality, but Roger Ver was one of the vocal ones. He obviously attacked our team quite heavily, and since then has been very vocal in supporting what I know to be lies about the company. Everyone needs a bad guy. And the idea that Blockstream, sorry, just a plane running overhead. I don't know if you're getting too much noise feedback.
I can hear it a little bit. It's okay.
Okay. If you think about the analogy, and I think there needs to be a lot of broad consensus. Building an ecosystem like this isn't just engineers. But if we go back to the invention of the aircraft and airlines, and airplanes being very popular. And there's Feynman wrote this incredible paper talking about cargo cults. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept.
No.
So cargo cults was this weird phenomenon in anthropology, where during World War II, when the US military was fighting war with Japan, they set up a whole bunch of forward operating bases where they set up landing strips on these islands throughout, Southeast Asia that they would use as refueling stations. And they set up small army barracks, and they would use it to land planes, take off, and launch bombing runs. A lot of these islands had indigenous populations that had never seen technology, never seen a white man. And the Americans, feeling guilty because they were just there to set up and fight their war, started dropping cargo containers full of gifts. They included pots and pans and canned food and clothes and boots. And it was their way of saying, hey, we may not be here for long, but we don't want to be total assholes. Here, have some gifts. And I had run across this studying gift cultures and post-scarcity economics. But after they won the war, they picked up their bases and they left. And anthropologists went back like 30, 40 years later, and they found that this experience, this culture clash, without real understanding and without real communication, had led to these what are called cargo cults, where the indigenous people mimicked what they saw. So they would dress up as soldiers, they would build planes out of a bamboo, and they would march up and down the airstrip, trying to pray to the gods to bring back a cargo container full of gifts. Because they thought that the soldiers marching and pretending to fly a plane is what brought the cargo container. And once they left and they had no cargo container, they mimicked and went through the motions, thinking that's how the magic worked. And it's known as cargo cult phenomenon, where people copy something because they think they know how something works, and they don't really take time to understand the underlying science. And Feynman's criticism of the scientific world when he wrote this paper, it was actually a speech at Stanford, and spoke about it, was so many scientists are building their entire careers and their work without doing like base level, first level thinking, research and science. And we saw the same thing happen in the block size wars, unfortunately, where call it Dunning-Kruger effect, call it just arrogance and hubris. I have lived and worked and surrounded myself with some of the top cryptographers in the world. I do that so I know how to trust and learn what is credible or not. And so I know how to use expertise in a very great way. And that means I know my limitations. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm not a cryptographer. Now, I can hold my own even in a protocol design meeting in some cases, where I can follow the math and I can point out things and I can ask good questions and I can ask about trade-offs. But I know my limitations. If we go back to the airplane example, let's assume that airplanes have been invented and someone owns the domain name airplane.com. This story you might recognize some analogies. And the person who owns the domain name airplane.com is incredible at selling and marketing airplanes. He great. This person's a great marketer. To their credit, they're an evangelist. Get on an airplane today. Go to Hawaii today. You can fly to Hawaii today in an airplane. It's cheap. It's fast. It's easy. Get on an airplane today. And everyone loves airplanes. And all of a sudden, there's actually some price increases because there's too many people trying to go to Hawaii. And this person says, come on, you guys need to redesign the airplane. Engineers who actually build airplanes say, we need some time because to actually do this safely, we need to take a whole bunch of things into consideration and we need to look at it. The person's like, you don't understand economics. If I can put more people on a plane, I can drive down the price. So let's just strap a whole bunch of fold out chairs to the wing. We'll strap them on really good. We'll give people oxygen fucking tanks and we can drive down the cost of airplanes and we can actually get more people flying on airplanes. Because the only thing that matters is everyone flies on an airplane. We can only do that if it's cheap. And a bunch of engineers say, you know what? That is not how we see the airline industry being safe and growing. We are actually responsible as engineers of this airplane. And if an airplane blows up or if it loses what makes it popular, we don't want to have that stain on our names. And so we have a fundamental disagreement on how the growth of the airplane industry should occur. What do we as a society think the marketer who runs airplane.com's role is telling engineers how to design a fucking plane? Excuse my language, right? The same way that person doesn't say, I've studied the economics of the energy industry, so I'm going to go in and determine the safety protocols for a nuclear reactor. No, you've got to be a nuclear engineer to decide how a nuclear reactor runs. And so that was what was lost. And I don't, I hate the tactics that were used, frankly, on some of both sides. Some of the demonization, some of the name calling, the lack of understanding that we're all human. And we've seen it emerge in politics. We've seen it emerge in social media. I just believe it leads to shallow lack of nuance. But there has to be also a respect for expertise. And there's some great books on this. The Death of Expertise is a great one that talks about just how we as a society have we've lost the ability to understand that some people have an outsized right to comment on certain topics due to the expertise they have accumulated. And if we think everyone's opinion is equally valid in areas of science or engineering, then we're doing it wrong. And I learned this the right way. I sat down when SegWit was very first, when Luke had come up with SegWit and when the scaling Bitcoin was about to occur, when they presented SegWit, I tried to argue with my own team. And this is the other idea. The idea that somehow Blockstream had one voice on this and that we were doing it to make profit is just so ridiculous. Every single one of our core developers had a contractual agreement that they could say whatever they wanted when it came to open source and community matters, even if it undermined the company's mission. It was a pain in the ass, but I wrote it in the contract specifically so they could be free, right? You try and look at any other startup that gives every employee the right to call the CEO of the company an idiot or asshole, right? We really wanted to make sure that we had no power to influence our core developers' opinions. So this didn't come from us. And even inside of our team, there were differing proposals. There were ideas on 248 as a scaling mechanism. But once SegWit was actually realized you could do it with a soft fork, you could have backward compatibility, that it fixed a whole bunch of other problems, allowing for things like lightning and proper scaling. I sat down with some of our team and I said, guys, I get it. This is a better engineering solution. I said, I love it. It's really, I believe you in all the reasons. And still I argued for a political, I said, but why don't we just do the hard fork, go to X number of megs and do it with SegWit? Because at this point, there's so much fighting in the industry and there's so much opposing conflict that it might be a escape valve, and it may allow for calming of nerves. And I'm an entrepreneur. I like to think and it was pointed out to me that engineering and designing engineering standards around what's good politically has never been a good answer for society, right? Like, we don't sit around on a committee and say, okay, what's the appropriate amount of poison to give to this person? It's just not good. On top of which, there were a lot of lies and deceit going on in the block size wars. People over-promising to certain exchanges what they could and couldn't deliver. Exchanges who had largely ignored what was happening in core, even though their businesses had depended on it. And some of those same exchanges have refused to deploy SegWit even to the day because of either their investor base, or some of them took money from people who were on the opposing side of the battle. And they were like, we're going to spam the blockchain and make transactions expensive until they do it our way. That's not how you do good engineering, is when someone's saying, hey, let's build a bridge extension or expand this bridge. People are like, oh, you're not going to do it the way I want? We're going to traffic jam your bridge every day and make it so unusable. That doesn't lead to better engineering results. And so all of the stuff that exchanges weren't doing, they were spending more time listing shitcoins than investing in batching, processing, proper internal netting. Now, some have been great, but there was just a lot of deferred engineering. And the idea was, let's outsource and defer this cost onto the open source community. And we're willing to risk decentralization and node count, because that really doesn't matter to our business. And that's not what I or many of us, I think, see in Bitcoin, which is people's money. And yeah, a lot of that deceit, a lot of that kind of tactics. And I don't think anyone came out of that innocent. I spoke with one of my friends who I think got really wrapped up in fighting the war, and No 2X and SegWit 2X and the New York Agreement, who got really heavy into the meme side and attacking anyone who was anti-core Bitcoin and accusing them of being the devil. And it was being thrown at them, and they responded in kind. And I actually asked the person, I'm like, do you ever feel like you won the battle and maybe we lost the war? Because those tactics have been embedded in the Bitcoin culture, this idea of anyone who isn't the one true Bitcoin, or there's this purity test. And if you step out of line on the purity test, you must be evil. You must be this very harsh labeling, and which makes it hard for certain people to come into Bitcoin. If this is really a monetary freedom, then it should be available to anyone. There shouldn't be a morality or a purity test that says you're only allowed to be a Bitcoiner if you meet these check boxes. And they were like, the person actually had a moment of reflection. They're like, yeah, I regret some of the tactics, but at least we won, because the alternative was we may have lost control of Bitcoin ever. Bitcoin's fate and the future could be decided by a bunch of companies in a room in New York who get to vote on, with no participation of the actual engineers who maintain it, what would have happened to the open source community and the meritocracy we had built on the open source project. And yeah, it was a very painful, difficult time. And I don't think anyone came out of that unscathed or with honest perceptions of anyone else in the battle. And that's what's unfortunate.
Whew, that took me down memory lane. So a couple of things I wanted to share. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. I was fortunate enough to be at a event where Dr. Adam Back and Roger Ver were in the same room with 60, 70 other of the people in the Bitcoin space. And I actually called them both out in front of everyone, asking them to duke out this conversation.
Was this the consensus 2015?
No, it's a Satoshi
okay.
Roundtable.
Okay.
By Bruce. And so, and funny enough, I was also at Consensus, because if you look at our investors, I was also part of those conversations, and I was on the side of the engineers. I've always been on the side of Dr. Adam Back's name is in the fucking white paper. To some extent, I think that carries a lot of weight versus
it is.
guy that's a marketer. I mean, I love Roger. I partially love Bitcoin because of Roger and his evangelism.
I think even Adam will point out.
Yeah.
Listen, Adam and I started a company together. We vacationed together. I know his wife. I've met his kids. But Adam's also not perfect. He's just an engineer. And I think Adam, first and foremost, above anyone, will actually say, hey, I'm just one voice. Now, he happens to ground his opinions in, I think, thought out and good scientific, process. And just as equally, there is Blue Matt and Matt Corello. There's Greg Maxwell. There's so many contributors, and Suhas, some of the guys from that team. There's so many contributors and people who actually have a say, that I think the same way I don't think Satoshi has any say today, because he's left the community. And I think it was the greatest gift. Just because Adam's name is on the white paper should not infer or carry some extra weight. He happened to invent or reinvent and customize a version of Hashcash as a postage meter system that became very effective when it was used in Bitcoin.
See, if you look
at he had also studied electronic cash and implemented every other version of eCash that had existed. So yeah he's thoughtful. He knows this shit.
But if you look at the 8 or 9 references that Satoshi put, there's only 2 or 3 that are really relevant. And Dr. Adam Back and Wei, there's only a handful. And so when people like that speak, I listen, is my point. Yeah. Anyways, and then the AXA thing, I also brought that up with Dr. Back in 2016, 17, and I asked him just face to face about it, and I'd read about it on Reddit and whatnot, and he answered similarly to what you'd had, and then I had raised money by then and understood the process enough to just be like, oh, this is a nothing burger, but guys like you are CEOs, and you're right in the middle of it, taking the arrows in your back, and oh my God, trying to deal with probably the emotional aspects, and your guys in the hospital, and this and that, so it's not so easy to maybe detach from some of the criticisms and everything that was going on. But wow, but I am happy that things played out the way they did, because I don't think Bitcoin would be where it is today if those things hadn't happened, and if it was just some willy-nilly project that anybody could take over because they have airplane.com, God help me, I'd be on to the next project.
Well, and listen, it wasn't just that. There was fake Toshi, there were attacks from banks and institutions. There will be other attacks. It's one of the things I think that, to a certain degree, the rhetoric in Bitcoin, especially now that Wall Street has jumped in, which I think is good, and the institutions, is actually starting to keep up with the threat modeling. So there was a period of time where Bitcoin was actually maintaining a very active, and there's a couple places that have done it, and some very good contributors to Bitcoin who have talked about threat modeling in a very good scientific way. A number of people have jumped in and started saying Bitcoin just could never be shut down. No government could shut it down. It's kind of like, okay, really? And I find some of these arguments shallow and not nuanced. There is a cost to a government shutting it down, but we've seen governments who have shut down the internet. We've seen Great Firewall of China. Yes, we have things like the Blockstream satellite that can get around great firewalls, but there are existential risks that I don't think we've been as good at modeling when we start talking about what happens when Bitcoin is 500,000 or 1 million. The average person, if we want this to be the money of the people and widely spread out, there was a time where bank managers had to have incredible security because their families would be held hostage while they were walked into banks and convinced to empty the vault. That was a real attack that happened throughout the 70s and 80s until it stopped becoming profitable because the FBI was so advanced and the bank vaults stopped having enough money at risk. That was not a viable attack. What happens in a society when everyone owns your own keys and has your own Bitcoin? We've seen in places without law and order where it's not a great, if you know that 20% or 30% of a population is Bitcoin and Bitcoin's just gone up to $2 million a Bitcoin, maybe you just start randomly grabbing people off the street and cutting off toes until they give you over their Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, dude. It's not, it ain't over. That's for sure.
See an autocratic
Yeah.
regime and an autocratic dictator who says, fine, you want to leave the country? Great. We're just going to make sure we take all your Bitcoin. And if you can't produce Bitcoin, then you're leaving with a few less fingers or toes. That's a horrible, some of the work that's now being done on reversible vaults, some of the work that's now being done on advanced Bitcoin concepts and some of the smart contracting that can actually build more complicated trust mechanisms. There are other mechanisms and other frameworks that we have to start thinking about. Also, are there ways that we can actually coexist with governments? It's one of the things, if you're a fan of Jeff Booth's Price of Tomorrow, which incredible book, and he's done a great job showing the failure of fiat and the collapse of the debt-based system that we all see happening or eventually happening isn't going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen easily. It's not same way I don't think gold goes to being worth nothing overnight. People view these as like black or white, when in fact, I know tons of people who still type on typewriters, right? Like they just prefer typewriters. So I think people are overestimate change happens very quickly, but it also happens very slowly. Just different time frames amongst different parts of society. And I think there are a number of governments who are going to be looking to move away from the thumb of kind of the IMF and debt-based trade and what has been mostly Western democracies' foreign policy mechanisms. And they are suffering as well because all trade is done in US dollar, because they end up having less. The US enjoys an incredible position of privilege being the world's reserve currency, and that's not going to go away overnight. But what are the alternatives? What are the mechanisms in which a society can actually take care of things like shared common services in it and coexist alongside financial freedom and Bitcoin as monetary sovereignty? Those are interesting questions that I think need more time spent on.
What are your thoughts on UBI, universal basic income? I know most Bitcoiners I know hate it. They tell me move on to thinking about something else or talking about something else. But
most Bitcoiners also hate tax. And frankly, I disagree with irresponsible taxation. I believe in kind of sovereign individual, that I think there should be competition. I currently am not living in Canada. I moved to a more friendly Latin American country that offers me a better climate and a more favorable tax rate. But I did it legally, and I did it based off freedom of choice and being able to migrate my business. But I actually believe that socialized medicine is good for a society. I believe that certain safety net on Maslow's hierarchy of needs is both necessary and functional. I am careful not to, there are lots of forms of UBI, and I don't believe in a free, encouraging kind of a welfare state type mechanism. One of the best studies I actually saw was an analysis of a couple of the native tribes that actually had income from casino income. And it did a differential comparison to, on one of these reserves, and this native tribe actually set up a tiered incentive-based UBI structure, where every member of the tribe got certain proceeds, dividends from the casino tribe that would allow them to essentially pay for food and pay for very basic rent. But it was like bare minimum. You're still just barely at the edge of poverty. And if you went in and got a high school diploma and accomplished high school, there was a step up. If you then got post-secondary education, there was a step up. If you chose to pursue entrepreneurship or like master's degree or PhD, you got additional grants from the shared community fund that would allow you to do that with scholarship. And if you then took a job and achieved certain financial income, there was a balancing of the funds such that it didn't become a huge part. And they looked at the effect of this compared to tribes who had no casino, like just who were dependent on government subsidies and were essentially kept in a state of perpetual welfare perpetuity through ongoing poverty with no steps or ladders to bring themselves out of it, versus some of the casinos that just hand out money and just say, hey, you're part of the tribe. We are making this much off the casino, and they just hand it out freely with no incentives and with no kind of layered. And oftentimes you saw rampant drug use, alcoholism, abuse, and misuse of some of those funds in some. And then they looked at this one and they saw within 15 years, we saw an absolute explosion up the social ladder, up the educational ladder, up the freedom, people being able to move off the reserve should they want, or people coming back to the reserve and doing charity and doing work as lawyers or doctors. And they could afford to do that because they had this net and because they were able to go out and get better careers and make their money. And so you actually saw the best version of the combined social assistance and the safety net to take care of the bottom parts of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, while still encouraging the self-actualization and the incentive and the promotion of people finding their dream and advancing their own happiness. And we need that. We need it on a global scale. Because if you actually look at the end state of where we're going with wealth inequality, with climate and economic migration, it's scary. So this is part of some of the stuff I'm working on right now. There's Blockstream, who wrote about the threats of AI, a great scientist. He's not the only one who's written about this, but he wrote a really fascinating paper talking about the vulnerable world thesis, which basically posits that with the growing power of singularity technologies in synthetic biology, energy, and the growing democratization and the lower footprint and access that we have to these technologies, it is almost inevitable in some period in the next 20 years, we will have a mass casualty event that will make anything that's happened in the last 100 years seem like small potatoes. And we as a society are just not equipped or ready to deal with that without generally falling into ruin, tyrants, and potentially rolling back the fate of humanity or ending it should these technologies start to be exchanged in a kind of asymmetric warfare or tit versus tat game theory kind of series of escalating attacks. A lone 15-year-old who doesn't like the way he's treated at high school is not going to go out with an AR-15. He's going to go and play with a CRISPR machine, download some files off the dark web, and launch COVID-32 that is custom designed around a certain race or a certain group of people or a certain gender of people, or someone who is actually stuck in a horrible place that's got an autocratic leader in Latin America who's being told you're not allowed to cross this border into opportunity. You have to stay where you are. The tides are rising while their currency system is collapsing and while crime runs rampant. And just by the nature of where they are born, they're being told you have to stay there and you have to live with that. It's not hard to imagine that someone's going to say, I view this unfair, and I can now build in my home a fleet of autonomous drones, and I can, unleash my will, and I can show you what it means to be so impoverished that you're willing to do anything to improve your life. And we're not set up well to manage these existential risks. And up till now, we've only had germ warfare, smallpox, and a few different biological weapons that were still mostly managed by nation states, and nuclear weapons, which following World War II, we were able to somewhat regulate. And there's been only a few rogue nuclear states that have come online because the bar to entry to be a nuclear power is so high. Centrifuges, enriched uranium. So it's hard to hide. It's very expensive to do. And it's not within the realm of just anyone. That stops to become reality as we move deeper into biological and information and nanotech and all these new technologies that are coming online. So there's literally hundreds, if not thousands of new technologies that could be weaponized and abused that could create major mass casualty events. And if we look at what happened post 9/11, which was just airplanes, a group of terrorists and airplanes, what did that do to society and our freedoms for the last 20 years? Crippled them, set us back, created a number of ongoing forever wars, and actually led to a lot of very horrible second order consequences. So what happens when some nations around the world say, oh, we now need to deal with the fact that 8 million people were just wiped out 3 months ago because someone was angry at the world or angry at their status or angry at XYZ, and they launched a fleet of autonomous drones that spread biological agent, or someone released some gray goo self-replicating nanomaterial, or someone did XYZ. And we as a society just aren't really good at thinking about how do we actually manage these risks. And even going back to Tim May, this was Tim May's experiment with BlackNet, because a bunch of scientists were proposing that we actually restrict access to the research papers and prevent people from knowing. And he did an experiment called BlackNet that proposed, he set up an anonymous, he posted to Usenet and basically said, we will pay you with anonymous cash. We are a group of information anarchists, and we will buy research from Lawrence Livermore Labs, we will buy advanced science papers, and we will sell them to any other nation state. And he did it just as an experiment to see who would write into the anonymous emailer. And eventually he went and gave a talk where he disclosed that he was behind this. He said, we never bought anything, but we had offers for nuclear research. We had offers, people willing to sell us this. And he basically showed that the idea of censoring information or censoring science, once something is discovered, is very pointless. There will be. And so when we assume that these technologies exist, we have to start thinking about how do we start doing root cause analysis? And how do we actually either prioritize technologies that build shared opportunity? And I believe Bitcoin, by the way, should and can be part of that. Because if we are able to move to a deflationary cycle, prices come down, as opposed to fiat-based asset inflation, where prices go up and you create an income inequality. But Bitcoin will not be distributed equally, universally, and around the world. Unfortunately, I hope it is. But when you're starting from zero and you're barely able to feed yourself, the idea of putting 10% of your paycheck in Bitcoin seems like a very rich Western idea.
Yeah, said. Hey, Austin, I just realized I went over my time with you. I feel bad. However, I wanted to ask you one final question. What is one thing that you believe to be true that most others in Bitcoin would disagree with you on?
I would probably take that theme that I touched on last, that somehow Bitcoin success is a zero-sum game. I actually really don't believe that. I try not to adopt zero-sum thinking in anything. It is a narrative, right? We all know Bitcoin, people talk about lately, even Bitcoin as a meme or Bitcoin as a story. That's what all monetary systems are. Yes, it's functional. Yes, it has a network. Yes, there's a protocol, but ultimately it's the shared belief that this is valuable, which gives it its power. And there is room in the world for lots of narratives. There's room in the world for lots of truth, lots of people's perspective on truth. And this idea that for somehow this narrative and for this thing to be its full potential, we require all fiat to die. We require all gold to die. We require that idea that for us to win, everything else needs to fail. I think it's wrong. I think it misjudges timelines. And I think it sets up overly adversarial dialogue that makes things unnecessarily hostile. And I think there's a way that Bitcoin can actually be seen as a tool to actually help the world solve some of the biggest problems that are coming. If we're going to have economic and climate-related migration and people literally standing, at borders saying, please give us hope, you want to be able to do foreign aid and you want to be able to help them improve their lot where they are with science, with technology, with new advanced nanomaterials, with a functioning economic system that properly drives down prices and encourages deflationary economics. What better tool than to include Bitcoin, help them rebuild their country with Bitcoin as a core part of the central bank's asset class, the same way gold is currently there. And the central bank doesn't have to say, we're getting rid of all our gold and we're only doing Bitcoin. They could say we have silver, we have gold, we have diamonds, we have Bitcoin, and we are going to relaunch and remonetize ourselves, not based off IMF foreign debt, but we're actually going to create a citizen class of asset owners, and Bitcoin will be part of that. And I actually think there's ways to approach foreign policy, foreign trade, and somewhat a Western democratic alliance of nations that has a chance to fight some of the more autocratic themes of society that Bitcoin is a key part of, and it doesn't come at the cost of shutting down or ending anything that's not Bitcoin.
Yeah, but speaking of, I know India is not a Western society, but it is Eastern, but it is a democratic one, and we've been at the forefront of the battle against the central bank.
I remember the lawsuit you guys were involved in.
And so a year ago, I think today or last week or something like that, we had actually, all three judges had sided with us and decided that the bank ban was unconstitutional. And my co-founders in India, they've literally put everything on the line for this mission. And yeah, from the bottom of my heart, Austin, thank you for everything you've done for the community. You continue to do for the community. This story, like I said, the theme is building on Bitcoin. I'm trying to encourage more people to, like you said, build in their country, for their country, people and those around them, and really the world at large. That's what Bitcoin allows us. It really, I don't know. It's the first thing that makes me feel like we truly are one, besides maybe meditation and some of that other hokey stuff. But because
man's included on that list.
I haven't been to one. You believe that? Okay, Austin. So this has been fascinating. I was going to say anything else. Okay, so I do have two trailer questions. The Ubi one you've already answered. The AI thing, I also just want at the end of it touch on AI. Is that an area that you're tinkering in? It sounds like a little bit you are.
I've done a few investments. I try and keep pace, partially on the existential threat side that I was talking about, where we're trying to model out some of these existential threats under this vulnerable world thesis. And can we prioritize certain technologies over others? I certainly believe that most people's estimation of AI is usually fairly uninformed. Obviously, right now we're getting really good at seeing the pattern matching capabilities. And I think people would be surprised at how many functions that require humans today can actually be done by pattern matching.
Yeah.
So many white collar jobs, some blue collar jobs, automated driving, legal work, medical research, drug discovery. And we're seeing AI and just advanced neural nets be able to be applied to all of these. And that I'm actually comfortable with. I think we need to get much faster, much further in thinking about the societal impact of that. What happens to jobs? What happens to tax base? What happens to, because the exponential growing debt that we have assumes that the growth in productivity leads to higher GDP from technology, and that you will have a base of new jobs and workers, which I just don't know if that's going to hold true. And so figuring out some of those transition and other issues around the current form of computer raw power neural net, kind of what's thought of as AI. The next level AI I'm actually much more concerned about, which is AGI, which is requires a whole bunch of breakthroughs, which many people think we have no idea of how to get there. But just as easily, we could accidentally discover AI. And there's a bunch of threat models that have been written about and discussed in terms of the emergent AI scenario, where it wasn't actually consciously brought into this world, and it becomes an emergent property of a lot of disparate systems talking to each other and aggregating that wake up one day. And if you have not read it, the Singularity series, it's a sci-fi series, walks through this scenario. And a lot of scientists I consult with believe this is one of the most likely scenarios for emergent independent AGI essentially coming into being accidentally.
I've read Kurzweil's work that Singularity is near, and I thought that you were referring to
sci-fi series.
Interesting. Okay.
It's a sci-fi series. It's 4 books, and it actually talks about a breakthrough AI AGI event and essentially a war with humanity emerging as AGIs take over. And we just can't even comprehend because they're advancing so fast in their intelligence. And it basically, I don't want to give it away, but it's not a very happy-go-lucky, everyone hold hands and celebrate. And so in that respect, I think we don't know yet how, or we can't even secure our own basic computers, much less actually start securing. The computer industry has been so lazy in approaching security, infrastructure. I think it's one of the greatest gifts Bitcoin has given is I think it taught people to rethink computer security. And it actually, by creating the live bounty on any mistake that's made, has revolutionized the research and the work being done on formal security systems. But even there, it's still not perfect. And before we start equipping computers with the idea, can we even restrain or contain an AGI? Should we discover it? Should we consciously actually create an instance of AGI? How do we know we're going to be able to secure it or align it with our values? And there's a lot of work being done on this. But given the fact that we just don't know how long it's going to take to do the security research, it's one of these things where I think there's some goodness in society when we start approaching existential risks as a precursor to invention. So instead of the idea of move fast and break things, which has been the kind of Western US, Silicon Valley, that's what's given us social media that's destroying democracies around the world and political discourse and elections. And we're like, oh shit, maybe the idea of everyone sending 140 characters back and forth or knowing who's dating who on a public feed, maybe we should have thought through some of the negative consequences of how that could be abused and set up some guardrails before we threw it to the world, exported it, and made it the primary news and political discussion platform for entire countries that are still figuring out democracy, much less our own, where it's destroyed and created echo bubbles. That's just one example of move fast and break things, but we're about to do that with biology, nanotech, energy systems. We're about to do it with AGI. And so this idea that we haven't created a society where engineers are taught and required, and engineering actually does this, computer science doesn't, where we teach ethics, we teach formalized risk assessments, formalized threat modeling, so that before you actually go out to build something, you actually have published everything and anything that can go wrong. You've discussed mitigation strategies. You've discussed societal impact. And we require this for people putting up buildings or putting up bridges, but we don't. Yet we know what role computers play in our society. So when it comes to AGI, I think we need to reverse our priorities and start thinking about AGI safety and AGI security as a precursor to more investment in AGI.
Beautiful. Wow. Yeah, love that train of thought. And also, what's your Twitter handle so people can, plug into your consciousness?
Just at Austin Hill, all one.
Done. Beautiful. By the way, I could do this forever, man. This was great. I'm sure a lot of people got a lot out of it and people feel inspired. I know I sure do, to go attack the rest of our day and life. Austin, this has been wonderful, man. Any parting words or should we bring this
No,
one to
thank you, Sonny. Thank you for the invitation. I always enjoy the chance to catch up, and hopefully we'll see you. And I'll drop you a note about which country in Latin America I'm in, and if you ever want to take a vacation, come see us.
Well, my wife is from Colombia, so I do spend a lot of time down there. Yes, I do.
Nice.
Hey, I'm gonna bring this one to an end. Just hang around for 2 seconds.